So this is campus of Stanford University in Palo Alto, California. Let's have a look around. I think that I saw the sign that said they have some zones that are restricted. Probably most of them are restricted, but we will see. Campus Arts Zone. Okay. I don't think I'll be able to park here without any permission, and even if there are parking spots here, I don't think it applies to visitors. So let's just drive to the main entrance and we will see what we will see. Stay safe. Campus Arts Zone. And there may be some roadblock. I see the car in front of me turning around. A zone close to public. Okay, so the guard indicated that I have to make a U-turn and get lost. So what I will try to do is find some parking maybe off campus and just walk. Stanford Visitor Center closed, no parking there. Everything seems pretty restricted today at Stanford. Have a look. Community zone, art zone, academic campus zone. And you are here. Am I? So, because I could not park anywhere there, everything's restricted. So I'll take a walk and we will see. This looks to me like a eucalyptus tree. And there is a lot of them on campus. And they are not native species to America. If I remember correctly, they are native to Australia. And they grow fairly fast, so maybe that's the reason why they planted them. There is a lot of them around me. Stanford Medicine, straight ahead, but I want to go to main quad, which is basically the center of campus. So I'll cross the road here and turn to the left. When Leland Stanford and his wife Jane opened the university 135 years ago or so in 1885, it was a pretty unique university. For one thing, it was free, no tuition. Another thing is it was not associated with any church organization like most of other universities at the time were. Another unique thing was that it was geared towards teaching kind of practical things, and also it was the first university in the West, if I am correct. Most of the universities, Ivy League and so on, were on the east coast of United States at the time. and some of them were a couple hundred years older than Stanford almost. Leland Stanford came from humble origins. His father was a poor farmer, and Leland himself earned his money during the gold rush, California gold rush. Until then he had many failed ventures where he didn't make any money at all. And as is usually the case, or was during gold rush, the people who were looking for gold, most of them didn't get rich, but the people who supplied them, many of them became rich. And he was selling to 49ers shovels and picks and other equipment, and he became rich. And later on he also got involved in politics, and he was at one time a senator and also a governor of California. And another major achievement in life was that he was one of the builders, investors of Pacific, I think, a railroad that eventually connected east and west of the United States. But his crown achievement was Stanford University, where I am walking right now. Zone close to the public, academic campus zone. I am pretty sure he will not let me in, but let's have a look. A museum of modern art and contemporary American art. The museums at Stanford are temporarily closed until further notice. Yeah. Anderson collection at Stanford University. Closed, of course. So I will turn around and backtrack a little bit, and let's go here. And this impressive building, I think, is Leland Stanford Jr. collection. Leland Stanford Jr. was son of Leland and Jane Stanford, and he liked to collect art, and it shows some mosaics on the walls here, sculpture, archaeology, progress and civilization. Yeah, on the building it says Lelands Stanford Jr. Museum, and here it says Iris and B. Gerald Cantor Center for Visual Arts. And there were supposed to be some exhibits, I guess, but since it's closed, maybe later. Nice. Okay, and here is a sculpture, Antonio Frilli, Italy, circa 1890, marble. Please do not touch. And right ahead of us is another impressive thing. I think it's Rodin sculptures. So let's check it out. The gates of hell. I have loved these awesome doors since the winter day in 1949, when I first stood below them outside the Rodin Museum in Philadelphia and was terrified at the prospect of writing my dissertation on the gates of hell. In one way or another, I have lived with them for 35 years. Albert E. Elson, The Gates of Hell, 1985. So, these are the gates of hell. And I think I recognize over there Rodin's sculpture called Thinker. I think. Oh, it's pretty impressive. Okay, let's check the hell. Oh, there's the end of it. Oh, there is back door to hell. And yeah, there are quite a few Rodin's sculptures. Prayer, Auguste Rodin. And this is Arboretum. Let's see what we can see. This is the only place in Stanford zones opened to public currently. Very impressive collection. I think ahead of us is the mausoleum, the grave where Leland Stanford's body was buried. Leland Stanford, Jane L. Stanford, Leland Stanford Jr. So it looks like the whole family was buried here. Yeah, and this is the statue of the whole family. Actually, the university is named after Leland Stanford Jr., not after his father. So, I will not be able to walk through the main quad and through all the other zones at the university today due to all those restrictions. So I think this is basically the place where it will end today. But before I finish, I still have to talk about how the university came about. And it's quite an interesting story. You see, the Stanford family didn't have children, but suddenly in later middle age, they did have a son. At that time, Leland Sr. was 44 years old, and I'm sure his wife was not that much behind him. So that was their only child. How did the university begin? The family took a trip to Egypt and to Europe, and that's where Leland Jr. at that time, like 15, 16 years old, he died from typhoid, and they couldn't help him in any way, no matter how many doctors they got. They moved him from Egypt to Venice, I think, but he died. So how did the university come about? Stanfords lived in Nob Hill in San Francisco, and they had a farm here down in Palo Alto, south of San Francisco, and they decided to build a university here. So they did, and it was opened in 1885. It was free, no tuition, as I mentioned earlier, I think, and it was kind of geared towards practical application of academics. And you can imagine that the student community was pretty diverse, not usual sons from the rich families like on the East Coast in Ivy League universities. So it was a pretty diverse crowd, and it stayed like that, I guess, up until now. But of course now this is not a tuition-free university, but some people get pretty decent scholarships, I think, and Stanford University is one of the richest universities. I think it's the third richest in the US based on endowment. They have almost $30 billion, and number one is Harvard, and they are, I think, at the 40 billion mark in their endowment fund. Well, but that is not the end of the story of the beginnings of Stanford University. You see, after the school started, several years later, Mr. Stanford died, and money to run the university was tied up for several years in courts, in probate court or whatever. So Jane Stanford supported the university by traveling to England and selling her jewelry and selling whatever she owned until the situation was resolved and she rightfully inherited whatever her husband had, or actually it sounds pretty bad, but what they owned together. And that could seem like a good point to stop. But hold off your horses. There is one more interesting thing that caught my eye, and it was only recently brought up or resurfaced, and it's not very much talked about, but I will. So, Mrs. Stanford's story. So she was a widow, she lost her husband, she lost her son, and she dedicated herself to the university. But the university had a president who was kind of in charge, but Mrs. Stanford was the owner. And as I mentioned, she lived in San Francisco, and one day before she went to sleep, she took a glass of water and it was bitter, so she spit it out, called her servants, I think 2 of them. They tasted it, they agreed it was bitter, and Mrs. Stanford had it analyzed, and it was laced with strychnine, enough of the poison to kill her very, very fast. As I mentioned, university had a president, and Mrs. Leland was kind of an hands-on, very hands-on, you could even say nowadays micromanager, and that was pissing the president off, because of course people in that position usually have an ego and their own ideas, difficult to say. But Mrs. Stanford went to Hawaii for a vacation, and basically, to make a long story short, she died there from poisoning. So they called the doctors, and they did determine, pathology doctor, pharmacist, chemist, who have you, police, they determined that she was poisoned. And now the president comes to the Hawaii, dismisses everyone as country hicks, you know, some islands in the middle of nowhere, recently acquired by United States, and basically killed the story that Mrs. Stanford was poisoned. And his version of the story took hold. He disparaged the doctors and people involved in the investigation of her death, and basically his version that she died from whatever natural causes took hold. However, two historians recently, in the last 10 or so years, reviewed all the evidence, and one of them published, I think, a paper or a book about the circumstances and all this and that, but didn't come to any conclusion. The only connection between the two poisonings, one in San Francisco, one in Hawaii, the second one successful, was that there was a servant whom Mrs. Stanford liked very much. They were friends almost, and the servant worked for Mrs. Stanford for 30 years or so. So that was the only connection, because the president of Stanford was not in Hawaii when she was poisoned and died. I mean, Mrs. Stanford. So unless he bribed someone in the household, it's difficult to speculate. So this was the story how Stanford University came about. Nowadays it is consistently ranked like in the top 3 universities in the world, and rightfully so when you look how many successful alumni the school produced, how many Nobel Prize winners and inventors and entrepreneurs graduated or attended Stanford. This is really, really amazing. I think nowadays they have like close to 7,000 students, as compared to the first year they had 555, interesting number, students. This was supposed to be a walk around or walk through Stanford campus with a little interesting pieces of history thrown in, but due to the circumstances, COVID restrictions, it evolved into history of the tragic life of Stanford family. I hope you liked it. It certainly is interesting, and I hope I will return to Stanford campus soon and do a proper walkthrough. So, if you survived until this point, it looks like you liked it, so please subscribe, give it a thumb up, and see you next time.